The morning started like any other. The faint smell of stale coffee and old paper filled the sorting office, a scent I'd come to associate with purpose. My van, old and reliable, hummed patiently outside. On the passenger seat sat the day's deliveries, stacks of brown paper parcels, crisp white envelopes, and glossy, colorful catalogs promising lives I couldn't imagine. It was a familiar weight, a familiar routine. I am a postman. It's what I do. It's who I am. But not every route is the same. Mine is Route 19B, the one nobody else wants. It begins where the city's neat grid of streets starts to fray and unravel. You take a left past the old abandoned textile mill, its windows like vacant eyes. The road changes there. The asphalt becomes cracked and tired, surrendering to weeds. Then the fog rolls in. It doesn't matter the season or the time of day. The fog is always waiting for Route 19B. It's a soft gray wall that swallows the world behind you, leaving only the narrow ribbon of road ahead. The air grows cold and still, and the only sound is the low thrum of my engine. My deliveries out here are few and far between. Weather-beaten farmhouses set far back from the road, lonely mailboxes standing like sentinels at the end of long, muddy driveways. I rarely see the people. I just leave their packages and letters, small tokens of a world that feels miles away. But there is one delivery that is different from all the others. It's the last one on my list. Always. The address is simply the house at the end. There is no number, no street name. The manifest just lists it that way. The house itself is pristine, a stark contrast to the decay around it. It's a two-story Victorian painted a crisp, clean white, with a perfectly maintained picket fence. The windows are dark, like polished obsidian, and no car ever sits in the driveway. No child's toy has ever been left on the lawn. It looks unlived in, a photograph of a house rather than a real one. Every day, I have one letter for this house. It's always the same. A simple, elegant white envelope. There is no stamp and no return address, just a single name written in a graceful, looping script. Elias. The paper feels thin, and the envelope is impossibly light, as if it holds nothing but a whisper. I always get the same feeling walking up the short gravel path. The feeling of being watched. Not by a person, but by the house itself. The air seems to thicken, and the silence becomes heavy, pressing in on me. I slide the letter into the black, ornate mailbox. The little red flag on the side is always down when I arrive. I push it up. Click. The sound is unnervingly loud in the quiet. When I return the next day, the flag will be down again. The letter will be gone. Today, however, something was different. As I turned back to my van, a flicker of movement caught my eye. On the second floor, in the far left window, a white lace curtain swayed just for a moment before settling back into perfect stillness. It could have been a draft, but there was no wind. The fog hung motionless, and the leaves on the skeletal trees were frozen in place. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I got back into my van, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I looked at the house in my rearview mirror as I drove away. The curtain was perfectly still. The house was a silent, white enigma against the gray fog. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me this time. It followed me, a cold passenger in my van all the way back to the sorting office. That evening, fueled by a growing unease, I did something I had never done before. I looked up the official postal records for Route 19B. I scanned the digital maps and the printed manifests. Every farm, every remote cottage was there. Except for one. The house at the end, the delivery I made every single day, did not exist in any official capacity. The land it supposedly sat on was listed as an undeveloped, empty plot, a blank space. According to the United States Postal Service, I had been delivering a letter to a ghost every day for the last 3 years. The next morning, another letter for Elias was waiting in my sorting bin. The next day felt different. The weight of the mailbag on my shoulder was the same, but the weight in my mind was new and heavy. Every mundane task of my job now seemed like a prelude to the one that mattered. The drive to Route 19B was filled with a low hum of anxiety. I saw the familiar wall of fog ahead, but today it didn't look like a passive weather phenomenon. It looked like a curtain, deliberately drawn to hide something on a stage. As I drove into it, the silence felt deeper, more intentional. I passed the usual lonely farmhouses, their mailboxes like outstretched, empty hands. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. I was just doing my job. I repeated that to myself, but the words felt hollow. When I finally reached the house at the end, it looked exactly as it always did. Perfect, white, and silent. A pristine tomb under a gray sky. But I was looking closer now. Was that a new flower in the window box? A single deep red tulip that I was certain hadn't been there yesterday? Or was my mind, now fertile with suspicion, starting to plant its own seeds of doubt? I took the letter for Elias from my bag. Today, I held it for a moment longer. I ran my thumb over the elegant script. I held it up to the pale, filtered light. It was empty. I knew it. I could feel it. It was a vessel for a message, not a container of paper. The thought made no sense, but it felt true. I walked the gravel path, each crunch of my boots sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. I could feel the windows watching me. I slid the letter into the black mailbox. Click. I raised the red flag, but this time I didn't turn back. I couldn't. The curiosity had become a physical ache, a pressure behind my eyes. I had to know. I got back in my van, drove just around the first bend in the road, and killed the engine. I parked where the van was swallowed by the thick fog, but I still had a clear, if hazy, view of the house's front path. And then I waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The only movement was my own breath fogging up the inside of the windshield. The world seemed to have stopped. There were no birds, no wind, nothing. Just the silent white house and me, a silent observer. I started to feel foolish. What was I expecting? Maybe it was all in my head. The blank manifest, the swaying curtain. Maybe I was just tired. And then it happened. The front door of the house opened. It didn't creak. It swung inward with a slow, deliberate smoothness that was completely silent. For a long moment, the doorway was just a dark, yawning rectangle. A figure emerged. It was tall and slender, dressed in simple, dark clothing that seemed to absorb the light. I couldn't make out a face or any features. It was like looking at a silhouette cut from shadow. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, gliding over the lawn without disturbing a single blade of grass. It didn't walk to their mailbox. It simply arrived there. It lowered the red flag, its movements precise and economical. It opened the little metal door and retrieved the letter. It held the envelope for a second, not looking at it, but rather holding it as one might hold a dormant butterfly. Then, the figure turned its featureless head and looked directly towards my van. I felt it. It wasn't a gaze of eyes, but a feeling of being perceived, of being known. A cold wave of pure dread washed over me, pinning me to my seat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The figure turned back, glided to the front door, and disappeared inside. The door swung shut with the same unnerving silence. The house was once again a still, perfect picture. I sat there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs until the cold forced my shivering hands to turn the key in the ignition. The next morning, I dreaded going to work. I thought about calling in sick, about quitting, about demanding a new route. But I knew I wouldn't. I had to go back. When I got to my sorting station, there was another white envelope addressed to Elias. But this time it wasn't alone. Lying on top of it was a small object that glinted under the fluorescent lights. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, made of tarnished, heavy brass. It was cold to the touch. There was no note, no explanation. It was just there. An answer to a question I was too afraid to ask, and an invitation I knew I had to accept. The brass key felt heavy in my pocket all day, a constant, cold reminder of the choice I now faced. There was no longer any question of ignoring it. The routine was broken. The mystery had extended a hand, and I had to take it. That afternoon, I didn't return to the sorting office. My route wasn't finished. It felt like it was only just beginning. With the letter for Elias on the passenger seat and the key in my hand, I drove back into the silent embrace of the fog. The world seemed to fade away faster this time. The gray was thicker, clinging to the van like a shroud. The silence was absolute. I felt I had passed a point of no return, that the road back to the familiar world had already vanished behind me. When the house at the end materialized from the mist, it seemed sharper, more real than ever before, as if my decision to engage with it had brought it into focus. I parked the van and stepped out, the single letter and the key feeling like artifacts in a strange ritual. I ignored the mailbox. My feet carried me up the gravel path, directly to the imposing front door. It was made of a dark, rich wood, with an ornate, black iron handle. Below it was a keyhole, dark and waiting. My hand was shaking as I lifted the key. It slid into the lock with a perfect, frictionless fit. I turned it. There was no loud, rusty crank of an old lock. There was only a soft, deep thump, a sound that felt like it came from inside my own chest. I pushed the door, and it swung inward silently, revealing the darkness within. I expected dust, old furniture, the smell of decay. I was wrong. The air inside was cool, clean, and smelled of old paper and ozone, like the moments after a lightning strike. The space I stepped into was impossible. It wasn't a hallway or a foyer. It was a room that stretched into infinity, lined with endless rows of small, dark wood mail slots, reaching higher than any ceiling should. They rose up into a gloom that my eyes couldn't pierce, a vast, silent, and sacred sorting office for the soul. Each slot had a small brass label. I stepped closer to one. The label didn't read a name or an address. It read, "Forgotten Melodies." The one next to it, "Second Thoughts." Further down, I saw misplaced trust, fading scars, and chances not taken. I was standing in a library of everything that had ever been lost. Then I saw it. The tall, slender figure from before was standing at the far end of the central aisle, waiting patiently. It wasn't menacing. It felt calm. As it raised a long, thin arm, it pointed towards a single mail slot at eye level. The label read, "Elias." I understood then. The letters weren't empty. They were carrying something for Elias, a soul so fractured by loss that it needed to be returned piece by piece. My job had been to deliver the potential for healing, the possibility of being whole again. I approached the slot and slid today's letter inside. It vanished with a soft whisper. When I turned back, the figure was gone. In its place on a long sorting table was a single sheet of paper, It was my old route manifest for 19B. All the familiar farmhouses were there, but at the bottom, the blank space had been filled in. It now read, The Postman. It was a job title. My job title. A new letter suddenly appeared in the Elias slot. I pulled it out. It was a simple white envelope, just like all the others. But the elegant script on the front didn't say Elias. It spelled out my own name. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and peaceful, what my new job was. I was no longer the one who delivered to the house. I was the one who delivered from it. I am the new keeper of this quiet, lonely place. I sort the regrets and the lost hopes, and I send them out to a world I can no longer touch. I am the Liminal Space Postman, and my first delivery is to myself. I have to send back all the pieces of the man I used to be before I can begin my real work. I don't know how many letters are in this archive. Thousands, millions. They arrive every day, silent whispers from your world. I wonder, if I look hard enough, will I find a letter with your name on it? If you want to hear the stories these letters contain, leave a like. It's a small signal that echoes in this quiet place, letting me know someone is still listening. And subscribe to the channel, because one day, I might just have a story to deliver only to you.